Today I'm speaking with Mike Rocks. Let me make sure I get this title right, Mike. Right now you're the director of lab and channel partnerships at Cancer IQ. Is that accurate?
That is my title.
Well, let's reverse back in time, shall we? Tell me a fun fact about the childhood of Mike Rocks.
And I labored on this question a lot recently because a lot of differences and a lot of changes have happened in my life, not just due to COVID. That's also circumstantial, but the one thing I became painfully aware of is I didn't have a single friend until I was about 15 years old.
Oh man.
I moved around a lot. My mom had an unstable job situation, so I bounced between ghettos, the ghettos of Yonkers, the ghettos of Queens, and so it was pretty, it was just unstable. And then when I looked at my father, it was the military. It bounced every 2 to 3 years. So I think that's a pretty unique thing. I mean, I moved a lot, and I've always thought that living in Germany was a good thing. But I think what's probably the most unique is that I didn't really create any friendships for a really long time in my life, which might surprise people given how gregarious I am
Yeah,
and, and that I'm in sales.
absolutely, right? I think that people would probably perceive you as more of a yellow personality, right? Very extrovert.
Yeah.
Yeah, interesting. Well, I would imagine that that is probably something that has crafted you to be the way that you are, right? Having kind of those introvert years and then balancing it out with kind of developing into an extrovert eventually.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well,
There's definitely a lot of pros, at least it relates to what we do.
yeah,
And then a few little kinks in the armor here that rear its ugly head every once in a while.
well, absolutely. Do you mind building out that bio a little bit? You've already kind of told us some snippets about growing up. Obviously, sounds like some difficulties, changes. Maybe I don't say difficulties. Sometimes when you're going through it, you don't realize what's difficult because you don't have anything to compare and contrast it to, right? But how did you, growing up, how did you eventually end up in kind of the field science, realm, genomics, precision medicine, some of the things that you do right now? Can you kind of bridge the gap for us?
Sure. Have you ever seen the movie Gattaca?
Absolutely. Ethan Hawke, right?
Ethan Hawke, Uma
Yes.
Thurman, and
Yes.
that. So I loved that movie. One of my favorite quotes is in that movie, and that movie inspired me to go to college for genetics.
Wow.
So I initially went to college. I went. There was only two programs in New York that had a program called recombinant gene technology.
Okay.
Always liked science. Always liked creativity. I'm a true believer that where we are about to enter in the realm of human race and genetics is super fascinating, super creative, and super scientific. And I bailed on it. But
What do you mean you bailed? You didn't finish, or
yeah, well, I got a different degree. I switched.
okay, you transitioned. Okay.
Yeah, but what I realized later, and we're talking about perseverance through difficult times and such.
Mm.
My affinity to that movie was less about the science and more about the underdog. That Ethan Hawke, despite all his genetic sort of weaknesses and vulnerabilities, still beat the top dogs. And to me, it was like super triumphant. And it's kind of my story. I was undersized for a kid for a really long time. On top of the fact that my mom lied to get me into school early, probably so she had extra babysitters. So I was really a year and a half younger than everyone in my cohort, which physically that was a big disadvantage. You're trying to play group sports.
Yeah.
So not realizing that I'd always overcome stuff.
Sure.
That's why I latched on to liking that movie so much. But it was that sort of perseverance and that upbringing that brought me to liking Gattaca and then going to school for it. And at that time, when I went to college, the Human Genome Project hadn't yet wrapped. So we hadn't really entered into this realm where we are now, where at that point it was just mapping the genome
Sure.
and understanding, you know, genome versus exome and understanding a lot of what we now understand and we take almost for granted. So at that point, it wasn't creative yet, and there wasn't anything to do, and I wasn't going to go to school to be basically a data scientist. You fast forward a couple years later, I get into sales. I start my own company. It fails. I bartend. A regular was like, "Hey, you should go into sales." I was like, "I used to." So there's a lot of work in pharma. I was like, "I don't know what that is.
Hey, now bartending, isn't that sales? Right? I mean, that's.
Yeah. Except the customer comes to you and you can tell them to, you can tell them to back off if you need to.
There you go.
We have to take the brunt of that all the time.
Yeah. So that's an interesting part of your journey there, though. Would you say bartending contributed to some of the skill sets you've developed and really honed?
No, I think that was. I'm sure I learned anything from any job I've had. No, I think there it was probably more a social involvement.
Sure.
I'd already been in sales. I'd already managed people by that time.
Yeah.
A bartender at 24, 25.
Okay.
So anything that was more teaching me the dynamics between men and women, because I was a really late bloomer.
I like it. Well, what are you looking for? Or let's before I get on the question, what are you really working on right now? Tell me a little bit about, what's exciting you in some of your current projects.
So at Cancer IQ, so after getting into pharma and then we Myriad and getting into genetics, which is very poetic in a way, right? Started there, then I built my last 11 years in the genetic space.
Yeah.
So after I left Myriad, I went to join a tech company that was trying to amalgamate all this disparate data. You have molecular data, phenotypical data, radiographical data. I'm trying to bring it all in one center area so that you can make sense of it and help steer and guide treatment, steer and guide research, and et cetera, et cetera. The issue is with all these companies trying to do all these things, there's still not a great enough awareness, or there's not enough breakdowns of barriers to really get more molecular tests into the hands of physicians of all sorts of specialties, not just oncologists. So I joined Cancer IQ because I know the owner for about 5 or 6 years, and what they're trying to do is break down many of the barriers from start, middle to finish when it comes to genetics. The space you and I are familiar with hereditary cancer, extremely frustrating space because unlike most medical conditions, the choice of whether to do either a procedure or a prescriber prescription is binary, or at least the decision trees are. When we get into hereditary cancer, we don't even call it indications, which we do in every other facet of medicine. In this area, we call it criteria. And there's just so many upfront barriers from just lack of general awareness of what the disease is. In my own sort of words, I call these disorders that labs like Myriad and Invitae and Natera are trying to diagnose. You're not really trying to diagnose HCRA. You're actually trying to diagnose if you have an impairment in defending against cancer.
Sure.
So we try to break down those barriers, the complexity and criteria, the time to collect history, all of that. Then the actual issue of ordering tests in some of these archaic systems, and then it's the documentation of the follow-up and what you do. So Cancer IQ kind of automates a lot of that and allows physicians to be more comfortable in just having a conversation with their patient rather than worrying, do I know how to manage if it's going to be a mutation positive outside my specialty? So what I do now is I bring in more labs into our network. So like Myriad or Invitae or LabCorp, so those labs can be ordered within our platform from any specialist. And then I also push our company and product to get outside of hereditary cancer into average risk, into cell-free DNA for disease screening, into nutrition with Abbott, to guide patients to nutritional counselors the way we drive patients to genetics if they're positive, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So as a director of Lab and Channel Partners, I'm trying to bring more partners into the fold,
Sure.
to centralize Cancer IQ as a platform to make decisions. So Cancer IQ is a name that we hopefully will change pretty soon because I think right now it's a little too acute for what we are doing in our roadmap.
Mike, your passion for data-driven medicine really shines. What is exciting for you over the next decade? If you're pulling out the crystal ball, what is coming with genomics, data-driven medicine? What do we have to look forward to?
Man, how much time you got?
The short version.
So the short version is, I think we are entering the fourth great human social revolution. I think this is going to trump the tech, the information tech phase. what we're starting to understand, and I think what Twist Biosciences is making it very, very clear, is that as biological beings, we are computer programs. Exactly what we are. Um, so if you look at binary data, everything is packages of zeros and ones,
Sure.
and there just so happens to be four combinations: 0, 0, 0, 1, 1, 0, 1, 1. And there are four nucleic acids that make up DNA: A, C, G, and T. So you can take all sorts of binary data, say a Word document or a movie. Look up Biohackers. Biohackers is a movie about this topic we're talking about, and it's the first movie stored in a molecule and not a server.
Oh my, I've never heard of this. It's fascinating.
So instead of taking all of that video file and making it into zeros and ones, they make it instead into ACGs and Ts. And then a company like Twist, using synthetic DNA, will embed that ACGs and Ts into a molecule. And so the future use cases of this are, let's say, Amazon, Alibaba, Google, Facebook, all of these companies that have thousands of acres of land with servers that take a tremendous amount of energy to power, a tremendous amount of energy to keep cool, and the best server to date will hold that data pure for about 30 years before you have to replace it. You could, if you convert all this stuff into synthetic DNA, you could take all the world's data, which we only capture about 30% of the world's data that's created. A lot of it just gets lost.
Sure.
You put it all into a shoebox. And then simultaneously have a source of truth that will last thousands of years, if not millennia, because DNA degrades so slowly. Now you can, whatever sequences to get access to your movie, also sequences what's going on in your body. So this is now, in my opinion, the true bridged gap between nanotech and biology. So that's just one example.
You just blew my mind. I like how tight your version of that was, and I have a feeling that could be, especially under a few drinks, probably several hours of very interesting discussion.
Yeah, overly verbose. But yeah, so I think we're in the realm, I mean, you think about CRISPR, we're in the realm of truly engineering and re-engineering us and other species, and hopefully we do it in a manner that's good and not bad. We don't know yet, but yeah.
Two sides of the same coin, right? Good and evil.
Yeah.
So tell me, what are some of the most potent lessons you have learned through some of the difficulties you've experienced in your life? It doesn't necessarily have to be on a personal level. It can be something business oriented. What is life lesson learned that you can share some wisdom with us?
I'll start with the lesson or the outtake and then followed by the lesson.
Great.
The outtake is all growth. All growth comes from failure. I can't think of a time where I've grown and learned from a success. And so I think what that has taught me is, if something seems challenging, if something feels daunting, if I have a tremendous deal of strife, of worry, I tend to follow that. Unless it's something dangerous, like jumping off I'm not going to jump off a building, but as long as it's fairly logical, I tend to gravitate toward that versus what's comfortable.
Fear is a compass?
What's that?
Fear is a compass?
Sure. Whether it's fear or uncertainty, it doesn't always have to be fear.
Yeah.
And I will say, I have several friends over the last 3 years. They've all followed the path of comfort, and financially and socially, they are doing better, as I guess social standards would dictate. Own a home, have a family. But I've sort of traveled laterally a lot and have a wider base of knowledge, at least in my opinion. And I don't know what that will bring, but I know that I've not been doing the same job for 10 years because it's been comfortable.
I love it. It's not an easy path to take, Mike.
No, it's like you're always chopping hedges.
Do you have a favorite quote? You mentioned Gattaca earlier. Is your favorite quote from that movie?
It's up there. Yeah, the quote is, without lead up, doesn't really make sense, but the quote is, "I never saved anything for the swim back."
Maybe provide a little context?
Yeah, so without giving spoilers to anyone who's listening to this or watches this, but there's a scene where the two brothers are facing off in a swim over the ocean, see who will quit first. Sort of a game of chicken. And so they're swimming in the ocean at night, and the more athletic and the more superior brother stops, and he goes, "How are you doing this? Are you doing any of this?" And Ethan Hawke turns around, he says, "You know how I did this? I never saved anything for the swim back." And it's just any podcast I listen to. From one of my favorite podcasts is NPR's How I Built This,
Okay.
and so many stories about CEOs going to the brink of bankruptcy, maxing out credit cards, and at that last moment, the cliff, credit cards are shut down, they don't have any money, something goes through, and it's usually generally a business that they believe in. It's not like some, you know, get rich, quick scheme.
Yeah.
And it's like, those who make it go all in. I mean, even Elon Musk couldn't pay rent; he had to borrow rent. And I'm not saying that that's a good behavior to do, but it's when you believe in something, whether it's working out, family, starting a new job. If you always have one foot out of the water, you're not going to learn how to. You're outside of the water, you're not going to learn how to swim.
Oh, that's deep wisdom, Mike.
It could get some people in trouble, but I follow it.
Definitely. Well, it means a lot that you're willing to jump on with me, share some of your insights and wisdom. I really appreciate that.
Appreciate having me on.